To truly understand how this disaster unfolded, we must strip away the romantic myths surrounding medieval warfare. Hollywood has conditioned us to imagine chaotic, honorable duels where the good guys win simply through superior heart. But warfare in the 14th century was a cold, brutal exercise in calculation, a competition of sheer mass, momentum, and, most critically, logistics. And by all calculated metrics, what happened here should have been impossible. The English army that marched north that summer, led by King Edward II, was not merely a military force. It was a moving city. It was the medieval equivalent of the Death Star. This massive force consisted of over 2,000 heavy cavalry, the medieval equivalent of modern tanks, and some 16,000 to 20,000 infantry and archers. These were professional killers, encased in plate and mail, riding war horses bred specifically to trample human beings into paste. The sheer size of this force was staggering. The supply train alone was said to be 20 miles long, laden with gold, wine, and portable wardrobes. Because Edward was so certain of victory that he packed for a celebration, not a fight. He saw Scotland as already conquered, and this campaign as a mere formality to reassert his divine right. Opposing this seemingly unstoppable juggernaut was Robert de Bruce, the self-proclaimed King of Scots. His force was laughably small in comparison. He had perhaps 6,000 men, mostly spearmen, with a handful of light cavalry. They wore no heavy armor, had no endless supply wagons, and were exhausted from years of brutal guerrilla warfare. If you were a betting man in 1314, putting money on the Scots wasn't a gamble, it was charity. The English outnumbered them 3-1, potentially even 4-1. But numbers on a page do not account for the terrain, and they certainly do not account for sheer desperation. Bruce knew he could not defeat the English in an open field. To do so would have been suicide. So, he didn't. He decided to change the map. The strategic prize at the center of this collision was Stirling Castle. It is impossible to overstate the importance of this fortress. It was the key to the kingdom. Whoever held Stirling held the gateway between the lowlands and the highlands. It was the throat of Scotland, and Edward II was coming to squeeze it shut. But there was a crucial catch. A year prior, Robert the Bruce's brother, Edward Bruce, had made a gentleman's agreement with the English commander of the castle. The deal was simple. If the English army did not arrive to relieve the castle by Midsummer's Day, 1314, the castle would surrender to the Scots without a fight. It was meant to be a clever diplomatic squeeze, but it backfired spectacularly. It gave the King of England a deadline. It gave him a specific date and a specific location where he had to show up. For a guerrilla fighter like Robert de Bruce, this was a nightmare. His entire strategy relied on hitting, running, and vanishing into the mist. He survived by being a ghost. Now, his brother's foolish deal forced him to become a wall. He had to stand and fight a pitched battle against the mightiest army in Christendom on a day chosen by the enemy. When Bruce heard about the deal, he was reportedly furious, likely wanting to strangle his own brother. But instead of railing against fate, he embraced the inevitability and began his preparation. If the English were bringing a hammer, Bruce wasn't going to be the nail. He was going to be the anvil. He arrived at the battlefield weeks early. He walked the ground of the new park, a hunting reserve south of the castle. He looked at the marshy streams of the Bannockburn and the dense trees. He began to envision a kill box. This is where the story shifts from a tale of bravery to a masterclass in combat engineering. Bruce realized that the English army's greatest strength, its massive size and heavy cavalry, was also its greatest weakness. They were slow. They needed vast amounts of space to maneuver, and they were arrogant. They expected the Scots to run. Bruce decided to use that arrogance against them. He began to prepare the ground, transforming the landscape itself into a weapon. This wasn't just about digging a few ditches. It was an industrial-scale excavation project designed to funnel the English into a meat grinder. As the sun rose on the days leading up to the battle, the Scots weren't just sharpening spears. They were digging. They dug hundreds of small, knee-deep pits known as pots. These weren't large moats. They were precise honeycomb traps, each about a foot wide and hidden with sticks and grass. Inside each pit, they placed a sharp wooden stake pointing upward. The design was cruel and specific. It wasn't meant to kill a man. It was meant to snap the leg of a horse. Bruce knew that a charging knight on a horse is a tank, but a knight on the ground, trapped under a screaming, thrashing animal, is just a man in a metal can waiting to be opened. The atmosphere in the Scottish camp must have been suffocating. Every man there knew what was coming north. They could probably feel the vibrations of the English march long before they saw the banners. The English army was a spectacle of wealth and power. Their armor shone so brightly in the sun that contemporary chroniclers said it looked like the land itself was on fire with light. They brought with them not just weapons, but the full psychological weight of the English crown. They were coming to crush a rebellion, to hang traitors, and to restore order. They did not expect a fight. They expected a rout. But here is the twist. The English vanguard approached the Bannockburn on June 23rd, and they found the Scots waiting, not hiding in the woods, not running for the hills, but standing in disciplined circles. It must have looked pathetic to the English commanders. A few thousand spearmen in rough tunics, standing against the glimmering tide of chivalry. But this visual disparity was part of the trap. Bruce wanted them to attack. He needed them to commit. He was dangling the bait, knowing that the English knights, driven by their code of chivalry and their lust for glory, wouldn't be able to resist charging. And he was right. The stage was set for one of the most shocking upsets in military history. But before the armies would clash en masse, a single moment of individual violence would set the tone for everything that followed. A moment that felt more like a scripted movie scene than reality, where a king would gamble his life and his nation on a single swing of an axe. It is the afternoon of June 23rd. The main English army is still struggling through the narrow roads to the south, but the vanguard has arrived. These are the eager young knights, the glory hunters, led by the Earls of Gloucester and Hereford. They ride out into the new park, expecting to flush out a few terrified peasant skirmishers. Instead, they find the Scottish army waiting in disciplined circles. And right there, riding out in front of his lines, is the king himself. Robert the Bruce is not hiding. He's wearing a gold circlet around his helmet, a gleaming target that says, "I am the king." But there's a problem. Bruce isn't on a massive warhorse. He's riding a small, nimble palfrey, essentially a pony meant for travel, not combat. To an English knight, this looks like a joke. It looks like a gift from God. Enter Sir Henry de Bohun. He's the nephew of the Earl of Hereford, young, heavily armored, and riding a destrier that weighs as much as a small car. He spots the gold crown. He sees the small horse. In his mind, the war is already over. He believes he is about to end the Scottish rebellion with a single lance thrust and become the greatest hero in English history. He lowers his lance, spurs his monster of a horse, and charges. This is the moment where history holds its breath. By all military logic, Robert the Bruce should retreat behind his wall of spears. A man on a pony does not joust with a heavy cavalryman. It is P6. If de Bohun's lance connects, the kinetic energy will punch through Bruce's armor and lift him out of the saddle like a rag doll. His generals are screaming internally for him to run, but Bruce doesn't move. He sits motionless on his small horse, watching the English knight thunder toward him. 80 yards, 40 yards, 10. At the very last second, just as the steel tip of the lance is about to pierce his chest, Bruce pulls his rein. He doesn't panic. He pivots. His small, agile horse sidesteps the charging destrier with the grace of a matador dodging a bull. De Bohun misses it. His momentum carries him past the king, exposing his flank in the back of his head. In that split second, Bruce stands up in his stirrups. He's wielding a battle axe. He doesn't swing it wildly. He brings it down with the precision of a woodcutter splitting a log. The axe strikes de Bohun's helmet. The force is so immense that it doesn't just dent the steel. It cleaves through the helmet and splits the knight's skull from crown to chin. The handle of the axe shatters from the impact. Henry de Bohun is dead before he hits the ground. The silence that follows must have been deafening. broken only by the thud of the body and the cheers erupting from the Scottish lines. This wasn't just a duel. It was a psychological nuclear bomb. The English vanguard freezes. They just watched their champion, fully armored and mounted on a tank, get deleted by a man on a pony with a hand axe. The invincibility of the English knight is shattered in an instant. Bruce returns to his lines, calm and composed. His commanders rush to him, furious that he risked the entire future of Scotland on a moment of bravado. They scold him for his recklessness, and Bruce's response: he looks at the splintered wood in his hand, shrugs, and simply says, "I have broken my good axe." This nonchalance is the final nail in the coffin of English morale for the day. The English vanguard, rattled and leaderless, retreats in confusion to the wet, marshy ground known as the Karst camp for the night. They are angry. They are humiliated. And they are thirsty. They begin to drink. Meanwhile, in the Scottish camp, the mood is grimly focused. Bruce knows the real test is tomorrow. He has won the opening move, but the full weight of Edward's army, 20,000 angry men, is about to fall on him. In the middle of this chaotic night, a shadow slips away from the English camp and heads toward the Scottish lines. This is Sir Alexander Seton, a Scottish knight who has been fighting for the English, but the sight of the day's events has changed his mind. He is brought before Robert the Bruce, and he delivers a piece of intelligence that changes history. He tells Bruce, "Sire, if you wish to take Scotland, the time is now. The English have lost heart." Seton confirms what Bruce suspects. The English are disorganized and cramped. Their massive numbers are actually choking them. They are packed so tightly in the narrow neck of land between the rivers that they cannot deploy their formations. Bruce realizes the English have made a fatal error in logistics. They have parked a Ferrari in a closet. They have power but no room to use it. Bruce makes a decision that defies all medieval military convention. He orders his men to prepare for a dawn assault using a formation that will become legendary. The Scottish uprising against English tyranny was not one on sentiment alone. To understand why the next day becomes a slaughter, you have to understand the mechanics of the Schiltron. This wasn't just a crowd of men holding sharp sticks. It was a highly disciplined, mobile fortress. Imagine a giant, bristling hedgehog made of 500 men. They stand in a circular or oval formation ranks deep. The outer ranks kneel, planting the butts of their 12-foot pikes into the ground, angling the steel tips outward at the height of a horse's chest. The ranks behind them stand, holding their pikes level at the height of a rider's face. Crucially, Bruce had trained these men to move. Unlike the static phalanxes of antiquity, Bruce's Schiltrons could advance while keeping formation. They were offensive steamrollers. The physics of the Schiltron are simple and brutal. It denies the enemy cavalry any surface area to contact. A horse, no matter how well trained, will not charge into a solid wall of steel points. It will shy away, swerve, and break formation. Dawn breaks on June 24th, 1314. The Scots are not retreating. They are marching out. 3 massive divisions of Schiltrons emerge from the tree line, advancing into the open plain like slow-moving mountains of steel. King Edward II, watching from his saddle, is bewildered. He turns to his veteran commander, Ingram Doomfravy, and asks a question that reveals just how disconnected he is from reality. Will yonder men fight? At that moment, the entire Scottish army halts. Thousands of men drop to their knees. To Edward, this looks like surrender. He laughs, exclaiming, "They kneel. They ask for mercy." Umfraveld, who knows the Scots better, looks at the kneeling men with dread. He replies, "They ask for mercy, sire, but not from you. They ask it of God. For these men will conquer or die." As the Scots rise, the psychological trap snaps shut. The English vanguard, led by the Earl of Gloucester, makes a fatal error driven by ego. Desperate to prove his loyalty after being accused of cowardice by the king, he orders an immediate heavy cavalry charge. This is the collision of 2 eras. 500 knights against a moving wall of pikes. The physics are horrific. As the English horses thunder uphill toward the Scottish line, they expect the peasants to scatter. They don't. The Schiltrons lock into place. The front ranks kneel, The rear ranks brace. The impact is a massive crash, like a falling building. But it isn't the sound of breaking Scottish lines. It is the sound of English cavalry shattering against an immovable object. The Earl of Gloucester is instantly thrown from his horse and hacked to pieces. Scores of knights are impaled on the 12-foot spears. Their horses, maddened by pain, rear and thrash, crushing their own riders and breaking the momentum of the charge behind them. The forest of spears holds, and then it does something terrifying. It starts to walk forward. Imagine the horror for the English infantry behind the cavalry. They are stuck in a bottleneck, bordered by the Bannockburn and the Pelstream burn. They can't move left. They can't move right. And now a wall of sharp steel is pushing their own cavalry backward into them. This is the beginning of the crush. The English army is so large that it becomes its own prison. The men in the back are pushing forward, eager to fight, unaware of the slaughter at the front. The men at the front are trying to retreat to escape the spears. The pressure builds. Ribs begin to crack. Men are lifted off their feet by the sheer density of the crowd. They aren't dying from sword strokes yet. They are dying from compressional asphyxia. The Scots have successfully engineered a human trash compactor, and the English army is the garbage. At this point in the battle, any student of history should be asking a screaming question. Where are the archers? 14 years earlier, at the Battle of Falkirk, the English destroyed William Wallace's Schiltrons simply by standing back and raining arrows until the Scottish formations disintegrated. A Schiltron is a fortress against cavalry, but against arrows, it is just a large, stationary target. The English commanders know this. They are not stupid. They are just cramped. Desperate to break the deadlock, the English commanders finally manage to maneuver a large body of Welsh archers out to the flank. They scramble up a steep slope on the Scottish left. This is the moment of maximum danger for Bruce. If these men are allowed to draw their bows, the Scottish lines will collapse within minutes. Just as the first volley is about to fly, a thunder of hooves erupts from the Scottish rear. It is Sir Robert Keith, the Mareschal of Scotland. He leads a small, elite force of 500 light cavalry. They have been waiting in reserve, hidden, with only one job: kill the archers. The timing is surgical. Archers are deadliest at a distance, but they are helpless in close quarters. They wear no armor, and because they were rushed into position, they haven't had time to plant their defensive stakes. Keith's cavalry hits them from the side like a hammer striking glass. It isn't a battle, it is an execution. The archers are cut down before they can loose a single effective volley. The survivors panic. And here's where the disaster multiplies. They don't run away from the battle. They run back into it. Terrified, screaming archers flee headlong into the packed ranks of their own infantry. The chaos is absolute. The English army is now fighting itself. Communication breaks down entirely. The rear of the English army still thinks they are winning and pushes forward. The front is being crushed. The middle is a swirling mosh pit of confusion. With the threat of the longbow removed, the Scottish Schiltrons are now invincible. They have no natural predators left on the field. Bruce sees the confusion and orders his entire line to advance. The Hedgehog is no longer just defending. It is hunting. The Scots push forward in a rhythm of stabbing steel, shouting, "On them! On them!" They fail as they drive their pikes into the chaotic mass. The English knights, the proudest warriors in Europe, are trapped in a nightmare. They are pinned so tightly against one another that they cannot lift their weapons to strike. Men are fainting from the heat and pressure, only to be trampled into the mud. The ground is turning into a slurry of blood and marsh water. The Battle of Bannockburn has ceased to be a contest of skill. It has become a contest of volume, and the English army is running out of room to exist. By mid-morning, the battle has ceased to be a fight. It has become a crushing machine. The Scots push forward. The English rear ranks instinctively push back to avoid the water. The result is a terrifying phenomenon known as crush asphyxia. Thousands of men are pressed together so tightly that their lungs cannot expand to take a breath. Knights in heavy plate armor are lifted off their feet by the sheer density of the crowd, suspended upright, helpless, dying of suffocation while still standing. Those who fall do not get back up. They are trampled into the mud by their own comrades. The stream becomes a dam of corpses. For the Scottish soldiers, this is a moment of savage vindication. For years, they have been hunted, starved, and butchered by these same English lords. Now, the roles are reversed. They shout, "On them. On them." They fail as they drive their pikes into the chaotic mass. They are not fighting individual duels. They are working like a thresher, harvesting the English army row by row. King Edward II, watching from the rear, is witnessing the impossible. His invincible war machine is eating itself. His commanders are dead. His archers are scattered. His infantry is suffocating. The greatest army in Christendom is dissolving into a panic-stricken mob. But the final blow, the stroke that will turn this defeat into a legendary rout, has not even landed yet. It is waiting just over the hill, in the form of an army that doesn't actually exist. High above the battlefield, on the crest of Gillies Hill, a new formation appears. To the blood-soaked, terrified English soldiers below, it looks like a massive reinforcement army. Thousands of fresh troops are marching over the ridge, waving blankets tied to poles to look like flags, pots and pans to sound like drums, pitchforks, and ladles. Instead of spears, they are rushing down not to fight, but to plunder the English camp or simply to cheer. But in the heat and haze of battle, fear acts as a hallucinogen. The English don't see washerwomen and cooks. They see the angel of death. The illusion is perfect. The psychological dam breaks. The English resistance instantly evaporates. This is the moment the battle ends and the hunt begins. The rear ranks of the English, who haven't even drawn their swords yet, turn and flee. But remember the terrain. They are boxed in. As they turn to run, they collide with the men behind them. The formation disintegrates into a chaotic stampede. The Scots, sensing the collapse, drop their pikes. They draw their swords and axes. The discipline of the Schiltron is replaced by the fury of the chase. They surge forward into the dissolving English mass. What follows is not war. It is a massacre. The English are fleeing in every direction. Some towards the castle, some towards the river, some straight into the deadly marshes of the Forth. The small folk rush down from the hill to join the fray, proving that in war, perception is just as deadly as reality. The mightiest army in Europe has been routed by a trick of the light and a few bedsheets. In the chaos of the collapsing English line, a frantic struggle is taking place around King Edward II. This is not a struggle to kill him, but to save him from his own incompetence. The Earl of Pembroke literally grabs the reins of the king's horse and drags him away from the fighting. Edward, dazed and humiliated, is forced to turn his back on the slaughter of his own men. But amidst this shameful retreat, one man makes a different choice. Riding alongside the king is Sir Giles d'Arc. He was widely considered the third best knight in all of Europe. As the royal party breaks free from the carnage, Archantan reins in his horse. He does not ride south toward safety. He rides north, straight back into the heart of the Scottish Shield. He turns to Edward and delivers one of the most devastating resignation letters in history. He says, "Sire, your reign was committed to me. You are now safely on your way. But I am not accustomed to fleeing, nor shall I start now. I commend you to God." With those words, Sir Giles d'Argentan spurs his horse. It is a suicide run, pure and simple. He charges into the massive spears, cutting down Scots until he is inevitably pulled from his horse and slain. He chooses death over the dishonor of survival. It is the last gasp of the age of chivalry dying in the mud of Bannockburn. Meanwhile, the King of England is experiencing a humiliation conga line. He rides furiously to the gates of Stirling Castle, the very fortress he came to save. He screams to be let in, but the constable of the castle, Sir Philip Mowbray, refuses to open the gates. It is a moment of supreme irony. Mowbray explains that the castle must surrender to the Scots per the agreement, and if the king enters, he will become a prisoner of war. Rejected by his own castle, Edward is forced to flee south, chased by Sir James Douglas, the Black Douglas. The pursuit is relentless. Douglas has only 60 horsemen, not enough to attack the king's escort directly, so he simply shadows them, denying them rest or food. 4 miles, the King of England is hunted like a fox across the countryside, until he finally reaches the safety of a ship at Dunbar. He escapes with his life, but he leaves behind his honor, his army, and the crown jewels. Back on the battlefield, the slaughter continues until sunset. The Bannockburn is so full of bodies that the Scots can cross it without wetting their feet, bringing our story full circle to the gruesome image we started with. Finally, in 1328, the inevitable happened. Edward II was gone, deposed by his own wife and her lover, and reportedly murdered in a manner too gruesome to describe here. His son, Edward III, finally signed the Treaty of Edinburgh, formally recognizing Scotland as an independent nation and Robert the Bruce as its rightful king. The impossible victory was complete. The Scottish uprising against English tyranny had forced the superpower of the age to bend the knee. But for Bruce, the victory was bittersweet. He had spent his life sleeping in caves, fighting in mud, and carrying the weight of a nation. By the time peace came, he was dying, likely of leprosy. He had won his crown, but he wouldn't live long to wear it in peace. Yet, he died knowing that he had done the one thing he promised. He had kept Scotland free. In 1320, 6 years after the battle, the Scottish barons gathered to write a letter to Pope John XXII. This document, known as the Declaration of Arbroath, is arguably the most important piece of parchment in Scottish history. But it is more than that. It is a revolutionary manifesto that planted the seeds for modern democracy. In a world of absolute monarchs and divine right, the Scots wrote something radical. They told the Pope that Robert the Bruce was their king only because he was good at the job. They wrote that if Bruce ever tried to sell them out to the English, they would fire him and pick someone else. This was unheard of. The most famous passage of this letter still sends shivers down the spine of anyone who values liberty. It reads, "For as long as but 100 of us remain alive, never will we on any conditions be brought under English rule. It is in truth not for glory, nor riches, nor honors that we are fighting, but for freedom, for that alone, which no honest man gives up but with life itself." This sentiment, that freedom is a natural right worth dying for, traveled across the centuries. Thomas Jefferson reportedly studied this text. You can hear the echoes of Arbroath in the American Declaration of Independence. The blood spilled in the muddy waters of the Bannock. Burn watered the tree of liberty that would bloom. 450 years later in Philadelphia, the lesson of Bannockburn is not about passion. It is about cold, hard intellect. Robert the Bruce didn't defeat Edward II because he shouted louder or had a bigger army. He defeated him because he understood the environment. He turned the geographies of Scotland into a weapon. He used the pots to neutralize horsepower. He used the Schiltrons to neutralize mass. He used the small folk to weaponize fear. It was a masterclass in asymmetric warfare that is still studied in military academies today. It teaches us that when David fights Goliath, David doesn't win by playing Goliath's game. David wins by changing the rules. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the brutal engineering of medieval warfare and the real David versus Goliath, decoding Robert the Bruce's impossible victory at the Battle of Bannockburn 1314, please help us win our own battle against the algorithm by hitting that like button and subscribing. It really does make a difference. Until next time, keep questioning the official story with the Sleeping Historian.